Good afternoon, everyone. Is this our last?
It is your last.
It is our last budget hearing. We saved the best to last. We're going to start this afternoon with the Accountability and Implementation Board, AIB, for anybody that wants to figure out what the initials stand for. We have Laura Hyde as our analyst, and we have Dr. Britt Kerwin and Dr. William Kerwin, and Ms. Rachel Heiss, and we're going to have the analyst go first here.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Again, for the record, my name is Laura Hyde, and I'm from DLS. I'm presenting the Accountability and Implementation Board. We're starting on page 1 with the operating budget summary. AIB's fiscal 2023 proposed budget increases by $3.8 million, or 393%, to $4.8 million. AIB is funded through the Blueprint for Maryland's Future Fund, which is a special fund created as part of Chapter 36 of 2021. This graph does not reflect an additional $650,000 for AIB from recent gaming revenue for initial operating expenses, but it does include a $280,000 deficiency appropriation, which brings the total working appropriation in fiscal 22 to approximately $1.6 million. If you would please look on page 3, Exhibit 1. This is the overview of agency spending. In fiscal 2023, AIB receives $4.8 million. Grants receive approximately $3.0 million, with 62%, salaries and wages receive $1.3 million, or 27%, with the remaining $325,000, or 11%, allocated to other expenditures. This information is also provided on page 4, Exhibit 2, in the proposed budget. If you please look on page 5, under personnel data. The fiscal 2023 proposed budget provides AIB with 15 regular positions. According to the fiscal note for Chapter 36, this allowance assumes 1 executive director, 2 deputy directors, 2 assistant attorneys general, and additional programmatic, fiscal, and support staff. This allowance includes approximately $250,000 annually for consultants to evaluate the implementation of Blueprint for Maryland's future programs, including required independent evaluations. Because AIB is a new agency that received a deficiency allocation to fund 5 new positions in fiscal 22, the agency hired an executive director in February 22 and plans to hire additional personnel in calendar 2022. If you please look on page 7, this is Exhibit 3, Proposed Timetable for Reporting Requirements. Chapters 36 and 55 require AIB to meet certain reporting requirements. However, with the governor's veto and the need for the legislative override in the 2021 session, not only has implementation of Blueprint for Maryland's future programs been delayed by 1 year, but the establishment of AIB as an independent agency and AIB's oversight for Blueprint for Maryland's future implementation has been unavoidably delayed. Despite these concerns, AIB has met 9 times since November 2021 to conduct a detailed review of its role, responsibilities, and Blueprint for Maryland's future statutory requirements, which in calendar 2022 includes a draft, comprehensive implementation plan and an interim report. On this timetable, you can see that this year AIB plans to have a draft of the report I just mentioned, the next couple of months, an interim report in November 22, and a completed comprehensive implementation plan by December 2022. If you please look on page 10, this is recommended actions. Because AIB is an independent unit of state government designed to hold other units of government accountable for implementing and evaluating Blueprint for Maryland's future programs, DLS suggests 1 recommended action for your consideration, which is the creation of a managing for results measure for the agency. Otherwise, DLS concurs with the governor's allowance. This ends my presentation, and I stand for questions.
Comments? I have a comment. I had the neatest meeting. I met a constituent over the weekend who told me he is board certified, and he is staying with our school system because of the Blueprint. He had been offered a job out of state, and he said he so believes in what this Blueprint's going to do that he is staying with Montgomery County Schools. That's fabulous. Good sign for me. Dr. Kerwin, take it away.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair and members of the committee. for giving us this opportunity to talk a little bit about the AIB and where we are at this moment. Chairman Ike Leggett expresses his sincere apologies for not being here today. He's recovering from some very minor surgical procedure and is recuperating at home, but will be back in action later this week. I want to commend the analyst for the excellent report, and has captured some of the things I was going to even say today. So a very nice job. As she pointed out, the AIB didn't officially start until late November, rather than the anticipated July of 2021, and we started without a budget. Our first order of business, of course, was to find an executive director, as called for in the legislation.
And we got the best one.
I was just going to say, we are, the members of the AIB feel blessed that we were able to attract Rachel Heiss to this position, which she assumed on February the 7th as our lone staffer. I pointed out to Rachel that she now has a totally different experience. Rather than telling how agencies should cut their budget, she's got here trying to defend ours. So a different role. So once the she is the lone staffer right now, but once the General Assembly passes the FY23 budget, we will be able to in April add 4 positions. As part of the deficiency appropriation. And then hopefully, if General Assembly approves the budget, we'll be able to add 10 additional positions and get our full $4.8 million budget at the start of fiscal 23, 1 year after that was supposed to have happened. Over the past 3 months, we have had these 9 meetings the analyst mentioned. Working to create a new agency out of whole cloth and orienting the members to their awesome responsibility for overseeing the implementation of the blueprint and ensuring that the legislative intent is followed as we move forward with this implementation. Oh, yes, and as Rachel, my able executive points out, I failed to mention that a member of the AIB board is with us today, and Dr. Mara Doss, who is an associate vice president at Prince George's Community College, and a very valued member of the AIB. Given the delayed start of our ability to get to work, we have been focused on recommending adjustments to the mandated timelines. I think everybody understands that there have to be some adjustments to the timeline. The blueprint, for example, called for the AIB to develop a strategic implementation plan by February 15th of this year. That was 1 week after Rachel was hired. Now, we all know Rachel is a superwoman, but even that was too much to expect from Rachel. Now, the strategic implementation plan is just such a critically important document because it provides the guidance, the timelines, the benchmarks for all agencies involved in implementing the blueprint to send their plans back to the AIB for its approval. And what we have suggested is that in a letter that's sent to the presiding officers and the governor that we adjust this February 15th date to consistent with the timelines in the original in the legislation to be completed by December of this year. And that would include, not called for in the legislation, but we think it's a good idea, a public comment period on the draft of the plan in October. And then we would take those public comments and complete the plan in December of 2022. Under this proposal, then, all the other entities, the LEAs, the MSDE, the CTE Committee, and others, would be required to submit their responses to this strategic implementation plan by March 15th of 2023. It's our understanding that MSDE and the LEAs support this new timeframe, but of course you'll get to hear from Dr. Chaudhary in just a few minutes, and he will add some comments to that, I'm sure. The AIB will then review these plans as submitted, and presumably make it possible for the entities to begin their implementation in the 23-24 school year, which would put us 1 year behind the original plan. The AIB is currently reviewing other suggested timeline adjustments as proposed by MSDE, and we're meeting on Thursday, the AIB is, and we will have comments on those proposals after our meeting this coming Thursday. Other activities that we're engaged in, we're quite far along on creating an advisory committee or advisory committees drawn from interested stakeholders from across the state to ensure that AIB can effectively represent the geographical, racial, socioeconomic diversity of Maryland's families and students. For the fiscal 2022 budget, the one we're in now, the AIB anticipates receiving most, if not all, of its full $4.8 million authorization through supplementary appropriations. However, based on the flow of fantasy sports and sports betting revenue, the bulk of that funding will not be received until near the end of the fiscal year. So we would not be able to encumber those funds, and potentially they would just be reverted to the general Blueprint for Maryland's Future Fund at the end of the year. Now, there's several other Blueprint programs that receive supplementary appropriations as well, and they're in a similar situation and unable to perhaps expend all of their funds in fiscal 2022. So the board is respectively requesting that AIB and other Blueprint programs receiving 2022 funding, supplementary appropriations, be permitted this year to carry forward any remaining funds. I think recognizing that everything got delayed, we feel it would be reasonable in this instance to allow us to carry forward those funds. The AIB fully supports the governor's budget as described by the analysts, which she said includes the 4 additional positions in the deficiency appropriation, and then 10 more positions to start fiscal 2023 in our fully funded $4.8 million budget. It also includes full funding for the Blueprint in general in fiscal 2023, including, and this is very important, the new education effort adjustment for less wealthy jurisdictions and other Blueprint programs. So, Madam Chair and members of the committee, I just want to say, speaking I know for my colleagues, how excited and energized we are to have this opportunity. You know, this is truly a historic opportunity for our state. We have a chance to do something no other state has ever done and create an education system working in partnership with MSDE and the LEAs that will be the envy of the nation and provide the children of Maryland with an education of the quality that you can receive anywhere in the world. And so, Madam Chair, this concludes my testimony, and I just again want to thank you for serving on the Commission on Innovation and Excellence, and for all of your significant contributions to the work of that commission. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And you know, I have always loved your enthusiasm with this, but looking at the people that are on that implementation board and looking at the timing for moving into this thing, I just think it is so well aligned that we've got to move forward and do great things.
Yes.
I'm very excited to support you.
Thank you.
Questions? Senator Alford.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you so much, Dr. Kerwin. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
And I looked in the analysis, but I'm curious, you're going to be hiring frantically, hopefully, as soon as the money's there.
Right.
What are your priorities in terms of staffing, and what will their roles be?
Right. Well, we've asked our very able executive director to develop a staffing plan. And she is hard at work in doing exactly that. So I might ask her to add a few words about what you see as your most important need as
Sure.
executive director.
Sure, thank you. I think what I've learned so far on the
Pull
other
that microphone over in front of you, please. Thank you.
on the other side of the street, so to speak, is that starting up an agency from scratch is very difficult, and that you really need the basics first. So a budget officer, so that you can actually access your budget, the IT folks to get your website up and running, and be able to start to live stream, the AIB able to live stream its own meetings and post content. And so the first hires are going to be very focused on sort of the basics. Also an assistant attorney general. There will only be one, not two, at least to start with. And then, try to get some really smart, capable, passionate people to come on board and just start digging in and doing whatever needs to be done in the very, in the short term. And then looking forward to the additional positions that will be available July 1st, starting to sort of build out the framework of the agency in terms of, content specialists who are very familiar with the various, what we're now calling pillars of the blueprint, the 5 pillars of the blueprint. Folks who have some experience with outreach. A big part of the AIB's charge is to educate the public and parents and everyone about what the blueprint is all about and why it's so important. And also, of course, the comprehensive implementation plan process. So getting folks on board to help move that process forward. And also definitely, we need research and data folks who can start looking at disaggregated data and start, focusing in on the outcome metrics that we want to incorporate into the comprehensive plan. And also part of that will be liaisoning with the Longitudinal Data System Center. That'll be part of the role of the center to support the AIB, I guess, and vice versa.
Okay.
So that's like the big framework. It's 15 positions goes pretty quickly, actually.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Senator Quarterman.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you guys for being here again today. Quick question in regards to the board. There was a lot of discussion, I'll say a robust discussion during the confirmation process for the board, and a lot what was talked about there when we talked about geographic representation. And through those discussions, it was mentioned that going forward, there was going to be some sort of work group or something set up,
Yes.
or something that would achieve that goal. And I guess, could you speak to how the board plans to achieve that diversity and what it might look like?
Absolutely. Yeah,
Thank you.
we are in very active discussions and about the creation of an advisory board or boards. We haven't quite decided yet whether we'll have a single advisory board or we'll have an advisory board for each of the 5 pillars but it's going to be a substantial board, and it will be drawn from across the state, for sure, to be certain that we hear all the voices, and address the issue of geographical representation by through this means. And so it's hard to say, given an exact date, but over the course of the next month or two, we will certainly create these advisory boards, and they will be fully in place to advise us as we begin the work on our strategic implementation plan.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Just to add, one of the challenges is the AIB doesn't have a website yet.
Right.
And we want to get the website up and running so that we can do outreach and make sure that folks are aware of the ability to apply to be on the advisory committee or committees and make that accessible to everyone. So that is, we need the website first, but.
Understood. And that'd be great if you could let us know at that time as well, so we can.
Sure,
Absolutely.
absolutely.
We will do that.
Okay. Thank you very
Well,
much.
thank you very much.
Looking forward to working with you and
Well-
the great things we'll accomplish.
Well, we're very excited about coming back and making you proud of the work you've
Absolutely.
done and the investment you've made in this blueprint bill. So thank you very much.
So great to see you both.
Thank you.
Okay, Dr. Chowdhury, come on up to the table. We have the MSDE, Aid to Education. Laura Hyde is our analyst. I think this is the last show you've got to do this year.
Thank you very much.
Go ahead, Laura.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. We're starting on page 1 with the operating budget summary. Again, I'm Laura Hyde. This is, I'm from DLS, and this is the aid to education budget analysis. So we're looking on page 1, the operating budget summary. The fiscal 2023 aid to education budget decreases by $1.2 billion, or 12%, to $8.7 billion, which reflects a temporary reduction in federal stimulus funds, partially offset by an increase in the general fund allowance. You turn to page 7, Exhibit 1, about federal stimulus funds to LEAs. This chart shows that in fiscal 20, 21, and 22, LEAs and the Seed School of Maryland received a total of $3.2 billion in federal stimulus funds for COVID-19 school closures and expenses. Of this amount, $2.7 billion were allocations mandated by the federal government. $303 million were legislatively directed actions allocated in the Relief Act and funded in Chapter 357 with ARPA funds, and $210 million were discretionary state allocations made by the governor. Exhibit 2 on page 8 shows the distributions of this $2.7 billion in federally mandated allocations to LEAs, which includes $1.8 billion in ARPA ESSER 3 funds, $782 million in SRSA ESSER 2 funds, and $187 million in CARES Act ESSER 1 funds. Expenditures of ESSER funds are in Exhibit 3 on page 9, which shows that as of September 2021, LEA expenditures of ESSER 1 funds total approximately $95 million, which is about 50% of the total funds available. The majority of these funds remain uncategorized. Other expenditures include instruction, student services, operations, and administrative costs. Reporting of ESSER funding is mandated annually as part of Chapter 55 requirements. We look on page 10. This is Exhibit 4. Governors determine federal stimulus funds to LEAs. In fiscal 2021, LEAs and Seed School also received $210 million as part of 3 state distributed allocations of coronavirus relief funds and GEAR funds. Of this amount, $200 million in coronavirus relief funds were allocated directly to LEAs for tutoring and technology, and $10 million was allocated in GEAR funds to LEAs for K-12 technology expenses. Exhibit 5 on page 11 shows these fund expenditures by category. The majority of these funds, 92%, were spent on instruction, with remaining amounts for other purposes such as student services, administration, and operations. You please turn to page 12, Exhibit 6. This is legislatively directed federal stimulus funds to LEAs. As part of Chapter 357, LEAs received a total of $303 million in Relief Act funds for COVID-19 supplemental programs. Half of these funds, $152 million, were distributed for supplemental tutoring and instruction, with TSI receiving $66 million, summer school receiving $50 million, behavioral health receiving $25 million, and school reopening receiving $10 million. Turning to page 14, Exhibit 7, LEA enrollment. So due to COVID-19 related school closures, school enrollment has declined since the 2019-2020 school year. From fiscal 22 to 23, FTE enrollment, that's full-time equivalent enrollment, declined slightly, approximately a little less than 1%, which follows on last year's decline of 2.25%. In addition to FTE enrollment declines, FRPM, free and reduced price meals, enrollment declined 7%, and special education enrollment declined by 2%. But language learners, or LEP, enrollment increased by 11%, and this reflects the state's overall increase in English language learners. If you please turn to page 15, it's Exhibit 8, Major State Aid. The total allocation for major state aid programs is $7.9 billion, which is an increase of $386 million from the fiscal 2022 allocation. Foundation program allowances increased by $404 million, which reflects an offset between the increase in the per pupil allocation as mandated in Chapter 36 and the decline in FTE K-12 enrollment discussed earlier. In the impact of increases on compensatory education, special education, and LEP are somewhat mitigated by the decreases in the FRPM enrollment and special education enrollment, but then again further enhanced by increases in the LEP enrollment. On page 17, Exhibit 9, you can see the overview of agency spending. Across all programs in the aid to education budget, the total fiscal 2023 allowance is approximately $8.7 billion, of which approximately 81% is general funds. The majority of funds in the fiscal 2023 budget go to LEAs and includes both general funds and special funds from the Blueprint for Maryland's Future Fund. On page 18, in Exhibit 10, this shows the $7.7 billion allocated in state funds, which encompasses both general and special funds across 22 programs. The $3.6 billion allowance for the state share of the foundation program accounts for almost half of these funds. Of the total allowance, compensatory education receives $1.3 billion, teachers' retirement receives $725 million, students with disabilities receives $574 million, LEP receives $422 million, transportation receives $336 million, and concentration of poverty schools receives $190 million. Remaining programs account for approximately $495 million of the total allowance. Exhibit 11 on page 19 displays the federal funds in the proposed budget, which is spread across 8 programs and includes $319 million for food services, $283 million for educationally deprived children, and $221 million for special education. You can see that TSI, which is a Blueprint program, receives federal stimulus funds from ARPA in this budget that were reserved in Chapter 357 in the dedicated purpose account. Details of this proposed budget are in Exhibit 12 on page 20, and I just wanted to note that if you look at this line, the net change in the compensatory education grant, you can see that this number here includes $57 million in hold harmless grants due to further decreases in FRPM student enrollment this year. The governor included this grant because students receive free meals as part of the Extended CARES Act funding. In the next school year, students will no longer automatically receive FRPM status and will need to enroll for these benefits. So DLS suggested that MSDE comment on LEA plans to enroll these students for the next school year and count eligible students for compensatory education funding in fiscal 2024. Turning to page 24 is Exhibit 13, Blueprint Revenues and Expenditures. Chapter 36 and 55 specify activities that are eligible to be funded with revenues from the Blueprint for Maryland's Future Fund, which anticipates a starting balance of $1 billion in fiscal 23. Revenues total $2.1 billion with a projected balance of $1.1 billion headed into fiscal 24. Blueprint Fund revenues and fund balances are sufficient to cover all costs through fiscal 25. However, starting in fiscal 26, the Blueprint Fund may no longer have adequate funds to cover all eligible program costs. resulting in the potential need to contribute approximately $260 million in general funds to Blueprint programs starting in fiscal '26. If this trend continues, by fiscal '28, Blueprint program costs may exceed revenues by approximately $1 billion. Exhibit 14 on page 25 shows the Blueprint programs in the fiscal 2023 budget. This allowance of $1 billion is divided across multiple agencies and program areas, $692 million of which is in the aid to education budget. $201 million is in the early childhood programs, $60 million is allocated for build-to-learn debt service, $57 million is in the budget for the Maryland Department of Health, and other programs receive $14 million. You can see this list, which is in Exhibit 15 on the next page, program. You would please turn to page 28. This is Exhibit 16, and this starts the issues section of this analysis. The supplemental budget, number 1, provided $140 million in general funds for Blueprint programs that were not funded in the governor's fiscal 2023 budget as introduced. Of particular importance is the addition of the $125.5 million in education effort adjustment funding, which provides grants for Baltimore City and Prince George's County and is considered state aid, along with funding for national board certification support. Turning to page 29, this is Exhibit 17 on maintenance of effort calculation for LEAs. Starting in fiscal 2023, as part of Chapter 36 requirements, MSDE must calculate LEA's MOE, maintenance of effort, as part of state aid calculations. MSDE is responsible for these preliminary calculations, as well as collecting the data that determines MOE for each LEA. Prior to the start of session, MOE certifications are processed and shared with the Department of Legislative Services for the upcoming fiscal year. For fiscal 2023, 2 different problems interfered with the MOE calculations. First, DLS did not have the finalized MOE documentation, which meant that a final number for the local share was unavailable for Baltimore City. Second, when comparing the expected result of the MOE calculation with MSDE's, DLS found 3 errors that affected 14 of 24 LEAs. These errors appeared to result from both faulty data as well as a misunderstanding of the Chapter 36 statute, and these errors include the application of a statutory calculation of an escalator provision twice instead of once for certain LEAs, use of a 0% change instead of greater than 0% change as the qualification for an MOE adjustment, and an inaccurate amount for Montgomery County's fiscal 2021 appropriation. So Exhibit 17 shows these errors by affected LEA, and this issue includes a DLS recommended action for your consideration for budget language restricting funds pending redistribution of revised MOE calculations to LEAs. You please turn to page 30. This is information on the autism waiver. The autism waiver program received a supplementary appropriation in fiscal '22 of $2 million to cover an additional 100 students on the wait list. MSD does not determine eligibility for this wait list until services become available. The program continues to have a wait list of over 6,000 individuals and a total cost to clear the wait list and provide services to all individuals in future years that exceeds $100 million. This issue includes DLS recommended action for your consideration for budget language pending an MSD report on this program. On page 31, Exhibit 18, this is P-TECH projected costs. The fiscal 2023 proposed budget level funds P-TECH at the fiscal 22 allowance of $1.9 million. However, MSD's projected cost for the program in fiscal 23 based on increased enrollment is $2.2 million, which is a potential deficiency for the program of $288,000. MSD does not have a systematic method by which to collect P-TECH enrollment for students attending community colleges, which prohibits accurate projection of future costs. And this issue includes our DLS recommended action for your consideration for an update on this program. Also on page 31, just slightly down, is an issue on non-public placement reimbursements and a proposed new framework to speed up the reconciliation process. So DLS includes a recommended action for your consideration for MSD to submit an update on this program. The remainder of this analysis includes appendices on teacher retirement, federal stimulus funding, enrollment, and additional details regarding the fiscal 2023 budget. This ends my presentation, and I stand for questions.
This was a lot. Great job. Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Zucker.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Ms. Hyde, just had a quick question. So last year, there were 1,400 spots available with the autism waiver, only 1,300 being filled because the 100 spots weren't able to get funding. This subcommittee fenced off $2 million, telling the governor, please fund it, and they did. So at this point, are there any other spots that are currently open that aren't being filled because of funding, or is everything currently occupied and now we just need to basically end the wait for the other spots?
So, as I understand it, right now, they are funding, it is fully funded for the students who have been processed and qualified, but there is, the way that they process students, on the wait, because of the long wait list, there may be the opportunity to actually look at the wait list and see what additional students might be eligible. So for now, there is full funding for the program as it exists, but there is also the opportunity in this recommended action to look more closely at the wait list and revise how that might be addressed.
Got it. So right now, there's 1,400 spots that are filled, because that's what we have funding for.
Yes.
And then if we want to increase capacity, then we just need extra funding for those spots.
Right, so we
Got
need
it.
extra funding
Okay.
for any additional spots.
Got it. Yeah, because last year, Madam Chair, there were spots available, they just couldn't fund it. Now, there's no spots available because there's no funding. So that's where, anyway, thank you.
Welcome again.
Thank you. With me is Justin Dayhoff, Assistant Superintendent of Financial Planning, Operations and Strategies. I have him just in case you stump me with a really hard finance question. So again,
We'll be working on that.
good afternoon, Chair King and members of the subcommittee. I'm grateful to you for your continued commitment to education and the General Assembly's support of our local education agencies. Thank you once again, Ms. Hyde, for your insightful analysis. Today's hearing is the first aid to education hearing related to the full new state aid formula tied to the Blueprint for Maryland's Future. This formula levies more resources in new targeted ways to fundamentally change the education landscape here in Maryland. I will dive right into the analysis. The Blueprint formula, as the analysis indicates, provides a total of nearly $7 billion in state aid in fiscal year 23 and requires roughly the same in local share. MSDE met the new statutory deadline to provide the data used to calculate the formulas to the Department of Legislative Services and the Department of Budget and Management on or by December 1st. The formula placed new requirements on the department to use data it had not previously collected or used for the purposes of the state aid formula. We want to highlight 4 areas of the formula aid in particular: compensatory education data, maintenance of effort calculations, national board certification data. Maryland schools have been providing meals to all students since March 2020 through USDA waivers of the school nutrition program requirements during the COVID-19 pandemic. As a result, there is less incentive for families to submit meal benefit eligibility forms normally required to receive free and reduced price meals. MSD recognizes the challenges that LEAs were facing in the 2021 school year and again in the 21-22 school year associated with the enrollment count for the compensatory education program. MSD appreciates the governor's hold harmless of compensatory education funds for each LEA in fiscal year 2023. The hold harmless funding ensures that LEAs receive at least the same amount of funding of comp ed funding in fiscal year 23 as in fiscal year 2022. For fiscal year 24 and beyond, the Blueprint for Maryland's Future requires MSDE to investigate alternative approaches to identify low-income students. MSDE released an interim Neighborhood Indicators of Poverty report in November of 2021. The report provides details on the department's plans to use a combination of methodologies to identify neighborhoods and dimensions of poverty. The plan uses 4 distinct elements of poverty: median household income, adult education level, home ownership, and household composition, and categorizes more than 3,700 census block groups in Maryland into 5 tiers. where Tier 1 is reflecting high socioeconomic status or low poverty, and Tier 5, low socioeconomic status or high poverty. Moving forward, the department will confirm and test the model, develop new school-level socioeconomic status tiers, study the relationship between school-level socioeconomic status tiers, school outcomes, and school resources, and support the collection of high-quality geolocation data. MSD appreciates the General Assembly's attention to defining and refining the data that better capture and more precisely measure poverty and reflect it. MSD respectfully disagrees with the issue and recommended budget bill language related to maintenance of effort. MSD was in frequent communication with DLS regarding Baltimore City Public Schools' delay in submitting the annual budget certification and the annual maintenance of effort certification statements. In mid-December 2021, DLS staff participated on a call with MSDE to review documents submitted by Baltimore City to ensure the correct application of Education Article 5-235C4 in determining the fiscal year 2022 maintenance of effort level. Following the call, MSD provided DLS with a copy of the Notice of Noncompliance sent to Baltimore City, which included the correct calculation of the maintenance of effort and the correct local share value, per the discussion with DLS staff. MSD received the final signed fiscal year 2022 annual budget certification and MO certification statements from Baltimore City in mid-January. The analysis also identifies discrepancies between MSDE and DLS in the calculation of fiscal year 2023 local maintenance of effort levels. The analysis refers to the discrepancies as errors, while MSD maintains the preliminary calculations follow the statute. I address those calculations in turn. With regard to the escalator provision, Education Article 5-23522 requires an escalator adjustment to the maintenance of effort calculation for counties below 100% of the statewide 5-year moving average of education effort. Education effort in this context is defined as the county's local appropriation divided by the county's wealth as calculated in the formula. In some instances, one of the calculations of the increase in local wealth per pupil result is 0, and sometimes the result is a negative number. In those instances, MSD makes an adjustment under the law, but the adjustment is 0. The analysis indicates that MSD should have only considered adjustments that were greater than 0 as adjustments. However, MSD followed the statute. In fact, MSD has calculated the escalator provision in the same manner since it was implemented. The analysis goes on to suggest that MSD should not have applied the escalator twice to some LEAs. However, statute specifically calls for the application of the escalator in these cases. Education Article 5-23524 applies to counties that were subject to the escalator provision in fiscal year 2022 and requires counties to provide an amount not less than the result of a 3-step calculation. The third step of that calculation multiplies the result in step 2 of the same calculation by the per pupil increase required in 5-23522, which is the escalator. MSD must implement the law as written, which includes a second escalator for LEAs whose maintenance of effort calculation is subject to Education Article 5-23524. Lastly, the analysis suggests that MSD uses the incorrect appropriation amount for Montgomery County's fiscal year 2021 local appropriation. MSD applied a consistent practice to the treatment of the supplemental appropriations provided to local school systems. If the supplemental appropriation occurs prior to the submission of the state aid calculations to DBM for the governor's allowance, the education effort calculation reflects the supplemental appropriation. If it occurs after that time, it is not. In May of 2021, Montgomery County provided a supplemental fiscal year 2021 appropriation to Montgomery County Public Schools. Accordingly, when calculating the 5-year moving average education effort for fiscal year 2022 or fiscal year 2023, the supplemental appropriation was not included. Though not identified as an issue in the analysis, I would like to address one other aspect of fiscal year 23 state aid formula to provide additional information, context, and transparency to the subcommittee today. MSD is also working to craft and operationalize the policies it will use to track and update National Board Certified or NBC teachers who have the primary responsibility and accountability for teaching students in a classroom as well as those who are teaching in low-performing schools throughout the year. MSD will provide guidance guidance to LEAs when that process is complete as to how and when the department will update MBC information each year. That way, LEAs will have a clear path forward in anticipating blueprint salary-related expectations for MBC teachers, particularly since the program has both a state and local share. MSD understands and concurs with all of the analysis, other issues, and operating language modification. With regard to the autism waiver program, specifically, MSD appreciates the governor's support and the additional funding for 100 additional slots for the autism waiver program. The MSD will continue to work with MDH and support their efforts to obtain approval from the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services for authorization. The program costs are impacted by a number of variables that are directly dependent on the needs of the participant and the participant's family, the actual services used, and provider capacity. Some children maximize the autism waiver and state plan services each month, while others may only utilize the service one time per month. The department understands and appreciates the complexities of implementing a highly technical and brand-new formula. Upon the release of the governor's budget allowance, MSD issued a memo to all district superintendents and hosted a call with all district school finance officers to review the new formula calculations. MSD also hosted drop-in state aid sessions with the local education agency superintendents and CFOs to help support local understanding of new formula calculations. In addition to formula implementation and LEA support, MSD also intends to bolster public understanding of the formula. These transparency efforts will be essential to the long-term success of the blueprint and the formula upon which the blueprint reform stands. Reporting requests to the General Assembly are equally important in this effort. I want to end today by acknowledging that the department is grateful for the opportunity to implement this once-in-a-generation reform effort. The formula takes big steps forward to provide adequate funding to our districts and our schools so that we can, as a state, once again lead the nation, and do so for all of our children and families, regardless of race, class, ability, or background. With that, I am happy to answer any and all questions. Thank you.
Any questions? Senator Zucker.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Superintendent. Always great to see you, and thank you for all your leadership. I was involved, I guess, last year with Ms. Heiss and other Department of Legislative Service staff on the Escalator piece for the maintenance of effort, and I appreciate your response, and I heard it verbally. I've had people call me from back home on it. Where can I point them to in your written response to indicate? Because I just want to make sure they feel comfortable with it, but.
Absolutely.
And maybe I just have a lot on my plate, but I'm looking at this and
Yeah.
I'm just trying to figure out where to point them in the right direction on your written.
Got it.
response.
I will refer to my ghostwriter.
Senator, you can find that on page 3 of the written response, and we're more than happy to provide that answer to you as well. If you'd like, I can spell that out now, or if, would that be helpful? Yes. Okay. So there are essentially 3 different components here. The first one is whether or not, in this case, 2 counties, I believe it's Kent and Talbot for FY23, would qualify for the kicker, if you will, or the escalator provision. The difference here is that the law doesn't necessarily define greater than, it just says that they qualify. And so while the adjustment is 0, it is an adjustment. And so by that, those 2 jurisdictions would qualify for that, or be considered to have qualified for that in the way we calculate maintenance of effort for fiscal 2023. As to essentially the double kicker, if you will, there are 2 sections of the maintenance of effort, 5.235.2.3 and 5.235.2.4. 2.3 is a 2-step calculation, 2.4 is a 3-step calculation. That second one has a specific 3rd step that requires us to multiply the result in step 2 by the per pupil increase required in 5.235.2.2, which is the escalator provision. So in addition to having met that under the requirements of the escalator provision under 5.235.2.2, which is, that's where we define 5-year moving average, if you're below that, you qualify. Districts who are subject to this calculation, as written here, have specifically in the law a direction to apply that a second time. That's different than the districts who did not qualify for the kicker in 22. That piece is missing. So I can't speak to the origin or intent of that difference, but as written there, there is a second kicker.
Well, maybe, do you mind if I have any additional questions? Maybe I could huddle with you and maybe some folks from Department of Legislative Services?
We do not mind huddling with people all the time.
Thank you, thank you. As long as there's no tackling. Huddling
Yeah,
is
yeah.
fine.
Senator Alford.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Superintendent. I hope you're the last of our session, and I hope everything went as you expected. I do have, and forgive me for, I normally don't want to read a question, but I did receive from a constituent a question about the EANS program, the Emergency
Yes.
Assistance to Non-Public Schools program.
Yes.
It's my understanding, and Laura, please correct me if I'm wrong, has that been expended, the 36 million that was allocated in December of 2020, has that gotten out to those non-public schools?
Want to give an update on that? Before he dives into it, originally MSDE, prior to me coming, went down a path to administer it in a specific way that ultimately came out to say, you can't do this. The U.S. Department of Ed told multiple states, you can't do it this way. And so we cleaned that up, and so we are in it right now, and are beginning to, allocate those services. It's one of those where MSD must hold property rights to those services as well because of the way it's set up and run a procurement process. We can go over where we are in terms of allocations and services and how much has been distributed. I believe it was in our last hearing where we talked about that, but you can.
Sure.
On that.
So there's about $21.6 million left of that original amount that we hadn't expended. So in the first round, when the department did put those out there, we essentially did that primarily through reimbursement. And again, to the superintendent's point, it is an odd program, right? We can't actually award funds to non-public schools. We can only award services and assistance. We have to actually, as a department, retain title and ownership, which is why even though one of the allowable uses, for example, is infrastructure, like HVAC, as you would expect with all things related to COVID. However, we have to be able to take it back at the end of the term. And so if someone were to install an HVAC unit, we would then have to go and remove that HVAC unit from the building. So when we originally did the application, we said, you can't request that because we can't do that. The Department of Education said, well, you have to allow them to ask for it, then you can say no. So that's what we did in January. So we re-released the application and we worked, we had over 200 applicants. We have about 184, I believe, who are actually eligible for that award. We are in the process right now of actually going through the procurement step because, again, we can't provide funds. We actually, as the Department of Ed, have to go and procure the services and assistance and deliver those. Meanwhile, since we have worked with the Department of Ed to figure out what that's like, we are now in the process of also working on our application for the next round of EANS, which is American Rescue Plan EANS funding.
Do you want to share what happens with the money as it moves to the governor's gears?
Sure. So anything that's remaining from the 21.6 that's left that does not get awarded, again, funds aren't getting awarded,
And
but
services.
services and assistance, does revert back to the governor's Emergency Education Relief Fund. So if there's anything left in balance there, that will revert. Currently, we have enough requests to actually expend the full amount. But again, that's going to depend on the procurement costs because it's all up to the vendor contract
What
costs.
were the top 3 services that we got in?
Top 3 services we've had requests for mainly reimbursement of PPE, as one might expect, I think, as well as tutoring and some additional service-based costs.
Okay, I was gonna ask how you're threading that very complicated needle, so I appreciate those examples.
You got it.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Corderman.
Thank you. Just to follow up. Where you're talking about the EA, and as it sounded like you're talking about a second, RFP going out, so to speak, or second process. How are you planning to engage the individuals or the stakeholders involved in that of getting that word out? And I guess when you're talking about what is or is not eligible, it seems like there's a little bit of confusion on that. Are you going to be able to clarify that more so to some of these entities so that when they are applying, they know what they're applying for, and it might be a possibility to get what that is without. I mean, I hear what you're saying when you're saying, well, go ahead and apply to it so you can tell them no, but that just seems a little counterproductive to the whole process to begin with. So if we can define what that is, it doesn't have to be right now, but when you're engaging with those individuals, if you could do that, and what's the timeline on that second one?
Talk about the new process.
Sure. So at the superintendent's direction, we, with the new release that we had in January, we worked to assemble a number of materials to both lay out in a really clear and transparent way what exactly is so peculiar about this program and why that's complicated, as well as to hold a couple of live sessions to support eligible non-public schools as they go through that process. And in those sessions, we go through all of the documentation that's required. We walk them question by question through the application itself. We talk through the types of information that we need them to submit for that. We had a dedicated call center that we actually opened specifically for non-public schools so they could have on-demand access Monday through Saturday to answer questions. We will also have a longer application window for the next round to provide some updates. And we've also teed this up with our non-public schools so that when we revisited this program in December upon notification from the Department of Ed, we essentially wrapped our EANS 1, if you will, into the EANS 1 and EANS 2 process so that we can begin scaffolding and norming on the expectations for the program, as well as being transparent about our timeline for both getting EANS 1, this first round, wrapped up and sort of on the books, and moving that directly into the second round.
And the videos are uploaded.
That's correct. So everything that we do, we also upload after the fact. So it's not just if you can attend the sessions, we made sure to post those publicly. We've made sure to provide accessible documentation accordingly. We have a dedicated website for those resources. We try to make ourselves as available as we can to respond to direct questions from non-public school providers themselves.
You know, there are so many integral parts of the blueprint that all have to work together. And I'm looking forward to working with you and the AIB board, and I just think we can do some great things. But we all need to fit together to do it. So feel free to reach out whenever you need to.
Absolutely. I tell everyone I got to hang out with a lot of people to figure it out, and so I plan to do that. And like Justin said, you heard all the drama during our first round of child care stabilization grants. We heard that loud and clear. We did a round 2. You have not heard a single piece of drama with round 2, and so that is how I plan to move. And we'll just get better and better. And I love having another accountability force to make sure I do get
Absolutely.
it right. And we will.
And you know what? And the public sure needs to know this. This is not going to be done without some errors somewhere. We're learning a lot as we go through this, and I think people need to be patient with us. They're going to see lots of improvements, but if they see a wrinkle, they're gonna have to understand that we're working our way to make things better.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
This was my first official end to session hearings.
Are you gonna celebrate now?
I am. Watching me pull off amendments is a good feeling.
There you go. That's good. All right. Thank you so much.